Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. So there's a little expose into the infighting at Kent County Council, controlled by Reform UK since the local elections earlier this year, of course, but not just a bit of argy-bargy. Full-blown dysfunction as the Reform UK Council leader has been shouting down her own colleagues as the pressure gets to them all. Now, what's the pressure causing them all to melt down? Well, as I've discussed before, Nigel Farage has built a political profile essentially on the idea that governing is easy and that life can be instantly made much better if only government was led by people who just got stuff done. It was a particularly tempting message during 14 years of national Tory governments where they made an art of doing nothing at all. So Reform UK went into the local elections promising to cut council taxes by simply eliminating all that bothersome waste floating around. And their candidates mostly believed it. Now that they're in charge, not just in Kent, newly minted Reform UK councillors have discovered that the waste doesn't actually exist. And actually, they need to raise more taxes from people. And the reality of government is causing major fracture lines because they just don't know what to do. As the Reform UK Kent County councillor has said, the leader, they can forget about Reform winning the general election if they can't balance the budget. These councillors are aware that they are the team which makes or breaks their national government's prospects, but they don't know what they're doing. So instead, they just do what they've been conditioned to do, blame the people in charge. Problem is, they are the people in charge. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified.
I'm not a dictator or an autocrat. I like feedback. I like to discuss. I like to hear what everybody thinks. However, when it comes to making the really big decisions, and I'm afraid LGR is one of those really big decisions, sometimes I will make a decision that might not be liked by everybody in the group. But I'm afraid you're just going to have to fucking suck it up, okay? If we can avoid putting up council tax by the full 5%, that is going to be the best thing that we can do to show that Reform can actually run something as big as Kent County Council.
So the many dysfunctional traits of Reform UK, the one I've spoken quite a bit about is the fact that their movement is essentially built on the notion that governance is easy and that the only losers with their system would be like nasty little foreigners and maybe people who make pride flags. And their supporters have been conditioned to believe that they should treat attempts to talk about trade-offs as establishment tricks to hoodwink them into accepting compromises. So I've said, that if Reform UK did win a majority and formed a government at the national level, we would see almost immediate infighting. Most of Farage's policies are not just half-baked, but actually impossible. Within a matter of weeks of taking office, he would have to try to explain to his MPs that he needs more time, they need to be patient, or something has to be watered down. He would become what they've been conditioned to mistrust. It would be utter chaos. And we don't have to wait for it to happen to see the truth of this. We're seeing it at the local council level right now. This Guardian article on Kent County Council has the Reform UK leader swearing at her own colleagues because she's run into this exact same problem. They all believed they'd win power, axe all that bothersome waste from the budget, reduce council tax, form the vanguard to Reform UK's rise to national power. Hurrah for us. Reform UK made a big song and dance of sending Zia Yusuf, Aaron Banks and a few others into Kent to do an Elon Musk-style Doge exercise. They loudly proclaimed loads of waste to the media, some of which, some of the media actually pointed out that it was all lies. But after the dust settled on their publicity stunt, the Reform UK councillors in Kent realised that in actual fact there was no waste in the budget. Now, they've tried to take credit for cuts that the previous Tory councils made. The end of the article actually quotes Reform UK saying they've made tens of millions in savings. No, they haven't. Those were shown to be savings the previous Tory council had already made. The new Reform lot haven't saved anything. They've not cut anything from the budget because they're still arguing about it. Hence the colourful language to one another. But beyond that, they were faced with a problem. Their budget was not enough to pay for the services they needed to deliver. They are allowed to raise council tax, but that's the opposite of their election promise. They could cut waste like they promised, but there isn't any. In other words, they're now facing the sort of tough budgeting decisions that mainstream politicians always talk about, but Reform UK have denounced as being the stuff of myth. Reform UK supporters, including their candidates for elections, because they're supporters as well, they are more likely to believe in unicorns the government budgets where there isn't loads of waste to cut. And so faced with the reality of the situation, they're fighting like rats in a sack, which is inevitable. As their council leader, Lyndon Kemcaran, says, they have to balance the budget or Reform UK is screwed nationally. And if you're thinking, well, you know, they're just one council, Reform UK have got control of quite a few others, so as long as they all do well, then that's fine. Yeah, absolutely. The others are facing exactly the same issues and engaged in the same level of infighting. It's just that The Guardian chose to focus on Kent because that's Reform's flagship council. They are starting to see the reality that there are no good decisions. What you have here is a council which is going to have to approach the budget in exactly the same way as their predecessors did, only the new Reform councillors have been caught out and don't have the experience or skills to do it. I will just point out one other thing as well. You'll notice in the clip that I showed towards the beginning, and you can see more of in the Guardian article, which of course I'll link below. They're doing a Zoom call. They're working from home. Another of Reform UK's thing is, oh, you should work at home, get into the office, you lazy bastards. But anyway, little sideway. They are also likely to make a much worse decision in the end than their predecessors. Not that it matters, because the cause of the infighting is that some Reform councillors are resisting all decisions. Remember, they've been told by Nigel Farage, their messiah, for years, you don't need to compromise. When people say, oh, there's trade-offs to this, no, they're lying. They're lying. You can have it all. Great public services, lower taxes, as long as you're white British, of course. I mean, just step back and imagine something. Imagine you've spent years believing a particular political philosophy, as many of us do, right? You're convinced that if only you and like-minded people were in charge, everything would be wonderful, right? Society is not short of groups like this. Then imagine finding yourself in power. Finally done it. Now you can show everyone just how great things can be. Then wallop. It turns out your political convictions are all bollocks. This is exactly what's happened here. Some of them have woken up to the reality they are essentially con merchants now, like their council leader. She's accepted that now. She's pragmatic. She now, in her mind, thinks she's just trying to make the best of it, right? But some of them are finding it hard to come to terms with that. So they're resisting. Like, they promised to cut council tax, not increase it. They promised to cut it by cutting waste. Some of them will have inevitably meant to keep their promise. They're honest people, right? Just deluded. They won't accept having to dishonestly do the opposite of what they were elected to do. So they have to object to everything because everything proposed is breaking their election promise. An absolute recipe for chaos. There was an interesting quote from one of the members of Kent's cabinet, Dean Burns. I work my arse off in my own portfolio and I'm still getting a rod up my backside every time. Oh, Didums, Dean, what's the matter? Is the job difficult after all? Imagine all the abuse people like him have thrown the way of serious politicians in his time. Now he's whining like a bitch because he's getting a bit of stick himself. Grow up. Reminds me of Tory Gillian Keegan as Education Secretary. Remember, a couple of years ago, when she wanted people to say, oh, well, why can't people just pat me in the back and say you've done a good effing job? Schools are collapsing. Schools are falling down. Kids haven't got schools. And she wanted to be told she's doing a good job. Stop voting for whiny little brats. It doesn't work out well. Anyway, infighting and whining. This is the inevitable result of electing a bunch of clowns into power who never undertook any serious preparation for the roles. Anyone who says to you, I can give you only good outcomes and no bad ones, no trade-offs, is not going to do that because it's impossible. They're lying to you, or just criminally incompetent like this lot, you know. So the article quotes the Lib Dems, pointing out that the Reform leader is treating her own colleagues in a way which would be considered unprofessional in a serious workplace. In other words, she's not even fit to manage a small office, much less a county council overseeing local services for over 1.5 million people. And I'll just add something else just to finish off with here. Something the source article doesn't mention, but I think it probably should. Or at least a question. We like asking questions. Nigel Farage likes asking questions. Here's a question for him. Where's the leadership from Nigel Farage here? I mean, you don't see established party leaders interfering in local council business, of course. But this is Reform's first taste of power. And they're struggling, right? They are struggling. There may be some Reform supporters out there who think that Farage is the one who has all the answers. Oh, yeah, it's failed. They're failing because Nigel Farage's not in charge. Well, why isn't he in charge? You know, never mind your cult of personality thinking. Why isn't he in charge? There's nothing to stop Nigel Farage going and being an advisor for one of those councils. Why isn't he going to help them out? This is an opportunity to Farage to show his leadership skills. But in reality, he's nowhere to be seen. Why? Because it's a shit show. And when the general election rolls around and people ask him about the broken promises and failures of his party in local government, come the election, remember, Kent County Council, as well as some others, they're going to have been in power for 4 years. They can't say, oh, you've got to give us more time. 4 years, mate. So no, when those questions inevitably come in 2029, he wants to be able to distance himself from them. And so Farage, who sent in a team of fixers to Kent the second they won power, now wants nothing to do with them or any of the other reform councils. I cannot emphasise enough just what a bunch of charlatans these people are. They will not honour any election promises. They're not doing it at the local level. They won't do it at the national level. And when the reform leader of Kent says that their success is tied to the party's prospects at national level, I do hope that's the one thing she's right about. Because she's going to crash and burn, just like every other reform council, because they never took politics seriously. So I do hope their fortunes are linked, because I cannot see reform retaining these councils when next they come up for election. Which, who knows, could well be the same day as the general election. Maybe 2029 can be the year, not of Farage's triumph, but the year we finally send him packing. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.